It was a quiet morning in the village. The sun was slowly rising above the trees, and the golden light touched the calm surface of the river. Birds were singing from the branches, and the fresh breeze carried the smell of wet soil. A villager named Rahim came out of his small mud house, holding a stick in his hand. Behind him, 10 goats followed, bleating softly. It was his daily routine to take the goats near the lake and let them graze on the green grass that grew along the shore. Rahim was a simple man, used to silence and hard work. He walked barefoot on the soft soil, looking at the calm water of the river. He always believed the river was a blessing for the village. It gave water for drinking, for washing, and for keeping the animals alive. Every morning, Rahim felt a kind of peace while walking by the river. The goats spread out quickly, lowering their heads to eat the fresh grass. Some goats climbed a little higher on the slope, while a few moved close to the water to drink. Rahim smiled as he watched them. The sky was clear, and there was nothing strange at that moment. He sat on a rock near the river and pulled out a piece of bread from his pocket. While chewing, he looked at the reflection of the clouds in the water. Everything looked so normal, so quiet, almost like a picture. The sound of the flowing river made him feel sleepy. For a moment, Rahim even closed his eyes and thought to himself, "Life is simple. As long as I have my goats and the river, I need nothing more." At that time, he had no idea that something inside the river was waiting for him and his goats. Something that would turn this peaceful morning into his worst nightmare. Rahim sat on the rock near the river, enjoying the calmness of the morning. The goats were busy eating, their soft bleats mixing with the sound of flowing water. Everything seemed normal, but suddenly Rahim froze. From across the river, he thought he heard someone calling his name. "Rahim." It was faint, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. Rahim lifted his head and looked around. The riverbank was empty. No one lived nearby, and no villager usually came this far in the morning. He frowned, thinking it was just his imagination. A few minutes passed, and he relaxed again. But then the voice came once more, louder this time. "Rahim." Rahim's heart skipped a beat. He stood up quickly and scanned the trees, the water, and the grass. "Who is there?" he shouted, his voice echoing over the water. But no answer came. Only the gentle ripples on the river's surface moved, as if something unseen had disturbed it. The goats suddenly started acting restless. One of them bleated loudly and backed away from the shore. Another refused to graze and stared at the river with wide, fearful eyes. Rahim noticed their behavior and felt uneasy. Animals could sense danger earlier than humans, he thought. Again, the voice called his name, this time clearer, as if it came from under the water itself. Rahim stepped closer to the shore, confused and frightened. He bent down, staring at his reflection in the water, but he saw nothing unusual, only his own face and the moving clouds above. "Rahim, come closer," the voice whispered, softer now, but filled with something strange, something that felt both inviting and dangerous. Rahim's hand trembled on his stick. The peaceful morning was no longer peaceful. The river, which always gave him comfort, now seemed alive, like it was hiding a secret. His goats bleated louder, pulling away, but Rahim felt frozen in place, caught between fear and curiosity. Rahim's heart was already unsettled by the strange voice from the river, but now he noticed his goats behaving in a way he had never seen before. Normally, they loved grazing freely on the fresh grass and playing near the water, but today, something was wrong. The biggest goat, the leader of the herd, suddenly stopped eating. Its ears twitched, and it lifted its head high, staring straight at the water. Then it let out a loud, fearful bleat and backed away quickly. The sound was sharp and strange, like the goat had seen something terrible. One by one, the other goats also began acting nervous. They moved in circles, stamping their hooves on the ground, as if warning Rahim of danger. Some pulled away from the riverbank, refusing to get close, while a few ran toward the trees, bleating loudly. Rahim frowned. He had been raising goats for years, and he knew their moods well. This was not normal. "What is wrong with you?" he muttered, trying to calm them down. But no matter how much he called or waved his stick, they refused to settle. Suddenly, one goat, the youngest of the herd, stepped too close to the water. It bent its neck to drink, but before it could touch the surface, the water rippled violently. Rahim's eyes widened in shock as the goat let out a desperate cry and vanished. It was as if something had pulled it under. There was no splash, no sign of the goat struggling, just a sudden disappearance. The water went calm again, leaving only circles of ripples moving outward. Rahim's blood turned cold. His hands trembled as he gripped his stick tighter. He could not believe what he had just seen. His goats were no longer just uneasy, they were terrified of something he could not yet understand. The voice returned again, echoing faintly from the water, and this time it almost sounded like laughter. Rahim stood frozen on the riverbank, his eyes locked on the spot where the young goat had vanished. His mind refused to believe it. Goats do not simply disappear into the water without a trace. His heart pounded in his chest, and sweat rolled down his forehead even though the morning air was still cool. The remaining goats had scattered further away, bleating in panic. A strange silence followed, broken only by the low sound of water moving against the shore. But Rahim noticed something unusual. The river, which normally flowed calmly, now looked different. The water seemed to be swirling in slow circles, as if something enormous was moving just beneath the surface. He stepped back nervously, clutching his stick like a weapon. His eyes scanned the water, and suddenly, he saw it, something pale breaking through the surface. At first, it looked like a human hand, but it was longer, thinner, and its fingers were twisted unnaturally, bending like claws. The skin was as white as bone, dripping with water. Rahim gasped and stumbled backward. Before he could scream, the hand sank beneath the surface again, leaving only ripples behind. Then, two glowing eyes appeared under the water. They were not the eyes of a fish or any creature Rahim had ever seen. They glowed faintly, like burning embers deep below the waves, staring directly at him. Rahim's breath quickened. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body would not move. The water began to ripple more violently, and the air grew colder around him. The peaceful river he had trusted all his life now seemed alive, like it was breathing, waiting, hungry. Suddenly, another goat cried out, and before Rahim could stop it, the pale hand shot out again, pulling the poor animal into the depths. The water splashed high, then fell silent once more. Rahim whispered in fear, "What are you?" But the river only stared back with its glowing eyes. Rahim's hands shook as he clutched his wooden stick, his heart racing so fast it felt like it would burst from his chest. The glowing eyes beneath the water still lingered in his mind, and the image of his goats being dragged down without a chance to fight haunted him. The once calm river had turned into a nightmare. The goats that remained were scattered and restless. They bleated loudly, their voices filled with panic, running in all directions. Some pulled toward the trees, desperate to escape, while a few still stayed close, but trembled with fear. Rahim tried to gather them, shouting, "Come back. Stay together." His voice cracked with desperation. But the goats refused to obey. They sensed something he could not fully see. The voice from the water returned again, softer but more insistent. "Rahim, come closer." Rahim, it felt like the river itself was speaking, calling him with a strange mix of sweetness and danger. Every time it called, Rahim felt a shiver run down his spine. A part of him wanted to run as far as possible, but another part, driven by fear and confusion, found his feet moving closer to the edge. He stopped himself just in time, digging his stick into the soil to hold steady. "No, no," he whispered. His chest heaved as he looked around for help, but the fields were empty, and no villager was near enough to hear him. Suddenly, the ground near the shore seemed to soften, almost pulling him forward. Rahim yanked his foot free, stumbling back. The laughter-like sound echoed again from the water, mocking his fear. He looked at the river, his eyes filled with terror. His goats were his life, his only wealth, but now they were being taken one by one. Rahim felt helpless. He had no weapon strong enough, no prayer loud enough. And yet, The river's voice kept calling, pulling him toward his doom. Rahim's breath came fast and uneven. The voice from the river had grown stronger, no longer a faint whisper but clear, almost human. "Rahim, come, don't be afraid." It sounded close, too close, as if it was right beside him instead of under the water. He gripped his stick tightly, but his hands were slippery with sweat. The goats had scattered into the distance now, their frightened cries fading into the trees. Rahim stood alone, facing the cursed river. Suddenly, the surface of the water began to churn violently, waves crashing against the shore even though there was no wind. Then, rising slowly from the middle of the river, Rahim saw it, the creature. At first, only a head appeared, pale and wet, with long strands of black hair plastered against its face. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, burning like coals in a dead fire. When it smiled, its mouth stretched wider than any humans could, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. Rahim's legs weakened, and he nearly dropped his stick. The creature's body rose higher, showing thin, stretched arms with claws at the end of each finger. Its chest looked hollow, like the ribs were visible through the skin, and water dripped endlessly from its form. Before Rahim could run, the creature lunged forward with impossible speed. Its clawed hand shot out of the water and wrapped around Rahim's ankle, its grip like iron. Rahim screamed, thrashing with his stick, striking the creature's arm again and again, but the blows did nothing. The coldness of the creature's touch spread through his body, as though the river itself was trying to pull his soul out. Rahim fell to the ground, clawing at the soil, desperate not to be dragged in. His fingernails filled with dirt, his throat raw from screaming. The river roared with laughter. The deadly encounter had begun, and Rahim realized he might not escape alive. Rahim's nails tore against the soil as he tried to hold himself on the riverbank. The creature's grip on his ankle was unbreakable, its long claws digging deep into his skin. He cried out in pain, kicking wildly, but the more he struggled, the stronger the pull became. It was as if the river itself had joined hands with the monster, determined to drag him down. "Let me go," Rahim screamed, striking with his stick again and again. The wood cracked against the creature's arm, but the beast only hissed, its glowing eyes filled with hunger. The mocking laughter echoed louder, bouncing across the trees, making the whole riverbank sound alive. Suddenly, Rahim heard the bleating of one of his goats in the distance. For a brief moment, hope flickered in his heart. Maybe he was not entirely alone. He shouted for help, his voice desperate, "Somebody, help me!" But no answer came. The fields remained empty, and the only reply was the cruel laughter from the water. The creature tugged harder, pulling Rahim's body halfway into the river. Cold water splashed over his legs and chest, sending shivers deep into his bones. His breaths grew short, his cries weaker. The river was swallowing him slowly, just as it had swallowed his goats. In one final act of defiance, Rahim slammed his stick into the soil, hooking it around a rock to hold himself. His body trembled as he clung on with all his strength, refusing to let go. His scream echoed across the lake, so loud that it startled birds from the trees. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the river grew silent. The ripples stopped. The glowing eyes sank beneath the water. Rahim was left gasping on the shore, his leg bleeding and his goats gone. The silence was worse than the noise. The river looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. But Rahim knew it was waiting, watching. And the villagers would never find out whether he truly escaped, or whether the river claimed him in the end. If you enjoyed this English horror story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments, have you ever heard strange voices near water?